Jeremy Scahill is in the building. Well, not in the building, but Jeremy Scahill is on the call, and I am going to be talking to him about the Gaza ceasefire deal. For those of you who don't know, Jeremy Scahill of Drop Site News is a brilliant investigative reporter, done a lot of reporting over the years, award-winning, and he was the one who actually broke the ceasefire proposal. And Jeremy, can you hear me?
I gotcha.
And he's here with us right now. Wow, you got the suit on today. I'm assuming you're doing a lot right now. So thank you so much for coming on to talk with our little corner of the internet.
I'm always honored to be here.
I hope you're doing all right. These are some interesting times. It seems some good news, even though I am still skeptical. And I actually wanted to talk to you about that directly, because you have over these past 2 years of unlimited genocide with American support, been one of the few reporters that has directly communicated, directly interviewed leadership of Hamas, leadership of the Houthis, the Ansar Allah movement, and have done amazing work in the field with this. And you actually interviewed the negotiating team, as far as I understand, or at least like the leadership in this last round of negotiations. So let's get right into it. This seems a little different in your estimation. Do you know why it seems a little different?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're 2 years into one of the greatest mass crimes in history. And, and I just want to say at the onset that, watching Palestinian reporters reporting today without their flak jackets on, the bulletproof Kevlar vests with the press logo on them, on the one hand, you feel this sense of relief, not just for the journalists, but for everyone that managed to survive. But then also, you feel this deep sense of sorrow, that Anas al-Sharif, for instance, the great epic hero of a journalist who was assassinated by Israel, that he wasn't here to be the Palestinian journalist in Gaza to break that news. And, I was talking with my colleagues today, and, there's so few of those journalists left, my colleague Jala Ahmed, who I do a lot of these reports with, was pointing out that, those scenes of the journalists, recognizing that the ceasefire was setting in, it's such a smaller crowd of people than the previous rounds when you had these truces. And, that also is representative, I think, of what we're hearing from so many people in Gaza. On the one hand, just an epic sense of relief. And on the other hand, everyone has lost so much and so many people. And, Trump himself said yesterday, that the price was high, and that, he said it's got to be at least 70,000 people killed. The number is certainly much higher than that. And, maybe one day we'll have forensic examinations that go in and we get some sense of the mass murder that took place here. But I wanted to start by saying that because, the negotiators who were dealing with the Israelis and with this Trump plan, I think there is a tendency in the way that Hamas is talked about, or that Palestinians are talked about, these guys are living in luxury hotels. They don't care about anything. They're just thinking about themselves. Khalil al-Hayya, who is the lead negotiator for Hamas and is the political leader of Hamas. His title is that he's the political leader of Hamas in Gaza. And he was one of the top advisors and colleagues of Yahya Sinwar, the former head of Hamas, who was killed by the Israelis. His son was killed on September 9th in an assassination strike that Israel attempted in Doha, Qatar. The Israelis tried to kill the entire Hamas negotiating team just weeks after Hamas had actually formally accepted the previous ceasefire deal that the U.S. and Israel claimed was the deal that would end the war. And they accepted it on August 18th. Most people don't know anything about this because it got almost no reporting in the media.
Yeah.
But on August 18th, Hamas actually accepted the deal that for months they were told was the deal they needed to accept. So they did that. Israel doesn't formally respond to it, and instead they begin preparations to invade Gaza City, which they did 2 days later on August 20th, in an attempt to ethnically cleanse 1 million Palestinians from the largest city in Gaza. And then they unleashed an assassination operation to try to kill the negotiators. So they failed to kill any of the Hamas negotiators or leaders, but instead they killed five essentially assistants, administrative assistants. One of them was Khalil al-Hayal's longtime secretary. And then there were four other, sort of junior assistants, and some of these guys that were killed I had met, before. And, these were essentially people that were carrying the bags for people, running to, errands. When I would do interviews, they sometimes would be the ones that would bring in coffee. That's who Israel killed in this strike. But they didn't just hit the administrative offices of Khalil al-Hayya. They hit his residence that he stays at when he's in Doha. It's not the Four Seasons Hotel. It's in the same compound where the offices were. And in that compound, when they hit it, was Khalil al-Hayya's wife, his son, his daughter-in-law, and his grandchildren. They killed his son, and it's not the only son that he's lost. He had other sons of his were killed in Gaza. But they also wounded his wife, his daughter-in-law, and his grandchildren, and some of them are still in the hospital right now from that strike. Bassem Naim, another target in that strike, has lost multiple members of his direct family. I'm just giving this as an example to say that, Netanyahu hides in his bunker, when the Iranian defensive strikes took place in response to Israeli aggression against them. And Israel, for decades, has just been assassinating any Palestinian who is representing any Palestinian resistance movement. So the context of what we're going to talk about is that this delegation headed by Khalil al-Hayya, who just had to bury his son, and right before he left for these negotiations, he very rarely does any kind of interviews. He sometimes will release statements. He gave a very brief interview on Egyptian television when he landed to engage in these negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh, and he was asked about this assassination strike. And he said, he recognized that his son was killed. And he said, we are not people made of iron and stone. We also grieve. And then he said, but I don't believe that my son's life is worth more than any of the sons of Gaza. And he was saying it's in the spirit of the memory of all of these people who have died that I'm entering these negotiations. And he said that I hope that their lives lead us on a path to liberation in Jerusalem. That's what he said right before he goes into these negotiations. So then the Palestinians are facing this odious Trump plan, which on the one hand contains some aspects that were familiar to the Palestinians because they had already agreed to those terms a few weeks prior.
Yeah.
And these mostly related to the acute war, as it exists in Gaza, meaning exchange of captives. The resistance in Palestine, in Gaza, is holding 20 living Israelis, we understand, and 28 bodies of the deceased. There still was this full spectrum blockade against any life essentials entering the Gaza Strip. There was a need for a ceasefire, and there was the issue of the withdrawal of Israeli occupation forces. So those terms, I'm not saying they were all in the language that Hamas wanted, but those terms were all present in the 20-point Trump plan.
Yeah.
But then there's this whole other dimension to it that talks about Tony Blair and Trump running a new so-called peace board there where they would become the kind of viceroys of Gaza, and there's going to be all this investment. And Trump, when he announced it next to Netanyahu at the White House, was talking about how Israel had given up the most magnificent piece of real estate in the Middle East, talking about Gaza. And then there's stuff about disarmament and governance and, who's going to be in control. And so the Palestinians start talking amongst themselves. And one thing we've talked about on this show, because we have the space to do it, but it often doesn't get mentioned, is that Hamas made a decision long ago in this negotiating process that they weren't going to just make decisions on their own. So they bring together a wide cross-section almost every political party or faction in Palestine, not just Gaza, but in Palestine, they've invited them to take place in these discussions. Some of them have taken place in Beijing. Some of them have taken place in Turkey and in Doha. And there are people in these discussions who represent movements that are not politically aligned with Hamas on every issue. For instance, Mustafa Barghouti, who is the head of the Palestinian National Initiative. He doesn't control an armed force. He's a man that believes in dialogue with the West. He's been a ferocious supporter of the right of Palestinian self-defense, but he's no member of the Hamas political bureau. He's been in these meetings. The secular left-wing PFLP, they've been in these discussions. In fact, the only entity that really hasn't participated in this is the Fatah party of Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority.
This is also reflected in the demands that Hamas has made as an approach in terms of the release of high-profile political prisoners that are being kept hostage in Israeli detention, such as Marwan Barghouti, who is, I would go so far as to say, almost diametrically opposed to the ways in which Hamas has operated in some ways, and yet is seen as a more popular figure. I don't know what his current opinions are. Obviously, things have changed quite a bit, but he was a fierce advocate for a two-state solution at the time of his apprehension, and had always tried to work within even Israeli groups and whatnot. And Marwan Barghouti is a more popular figure than Abbas, who is very unpopular. I believe last polling I saw was putting him at 7% as opposed to Hamas at 32%. And this is Palestinians both in the West Bank and also in the Gaza Strip. And Marwan Barghouti's approval ratings amongst the Palestinian population was around 62%. So the very fact that they were committed to the release of a high-profile prisoner, a high-profile Palestinian prisoner that would be a uniting figure that would actually overthrow any sort of leadership that Hamas could potentially have in the political future of Palestinians, implies that their first priority, first and foremost, is always the emancipatory needs of the Palestinians and a need for sovereignty for the Palestinians, rather than the cynical approach that Israel has consistently taken in this, where they assumed, perhaps falsely, that Hamas is only invested in maintaining its grip of power and simply making themselves a more popular unit that can just dominate the lives of Palestinians and then make money with real estate deals or whatever as they go live in mansions in Doha, as they like to claim.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of, to connect what you're saying to sort of where I was heading with this, and I want to talk about what you said about Marwan Barghouti in a second, because I think it's important, because as I understand it right now, as you and I are speaking, there is still negotiation happening over which Palestinians are going to be freed in this deal, and we could talk about that in a moment. But to finish the arc of this, so basically what ended up happening is that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, because they are the ones holding the Israeli captives, because they control the armed forces, the bulk of the armed forces fighting against Israel, Saraya al-Quds from Islamic Jihad and Qassam brigades from Hamas, what they decided, the way that they threaded the needle in responding to Trump, was they said, we can negotiate an end to this war because we're the combatants in this war and we hold the prisoners of war. But all these other issues, we have to defer those because that requires all Palestinians having a voice, because it cuts to the heart of the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. So that was the response that they gave to Trump. They didn't reject anything. It was very brilliant how they did it. Trump responds positively to it, does his post on Truth Social, and then that's the context for how these negotiations go. The negotiations we're going to talk about these issues related directly to the war, and Hamas has said we're going to defer these other ones. Trump accepted that framework at least to make this deal around the captives. My understanding from sources is that they're now saying they want to immediately, after the captives are exchanged, immediately go into those other negotiations. So that's going to be a whole other battle, and it's a very dangerous situation for the Palestinians. And there's going to be a lot of dirty stuff going down there. The issue of the Palestinian political prisoners that you're talking about, my understanding is that there are upwards of 15,000 Palestinians currently now in Israeli hands. There's officially 11,000 that are in prisons or jails or administrative detention, and it's
You just got cut out for a second. You said administrative detention is the last word you.
But then there are others that are held in a kind of non-registered manner, and there are, the last estimate I got from the resistance was that they believe that there were more than 4,000 Palestinians who have been snatched from Gaza since October 7th. And now some of those are definitely Nukba fighters or other, the elite unit of Qassam that led the October 7th attacks. Yeah. Some of them are other fighters. But a lot of them, and probably the majority of them, are Palestinians who were kidnapped by Israel, taken hostage explicitly for the purpose of doing these kinds of deals, exchange deals.
Doctors, nurses, teachers, children, people that they paraded as...
Hundreds of children.
Yeah. People that they paraded as like these Nukba fighters. Because like in Israeli society, when that term is utilized, that's a reference to all Palestinian captives. They will openly state that every single Palestinian captive they have, regardless of their background, is a Nukba fighter. This is a way to basically justify whatever kind of violence that these Palestinian captives are actually experiencing, including but not limited to. Literally, this was a emergency Knesset meeting that happened during the pro riots that took place after Israel tried to, in an effort to utilize complementarity, tried to prosecute some of these Israeli concentration camp guards that had a bunch of Palestinian prisoners, some to death, on CCTV. And there were pro riots, and the emergency Knesset meeting that took place, they straight up said, these are Nukba fighters. They're all Nukba fighters. They could be to death. It's totally appropriate and totally allowed.
Well, and from the perspective of the Palestinian resistance, they view the Nukba fighters as the most well-trained, experienced soldiers that they have in their forces. And anyone that has paid any level of attention to the Palestinian cause for liberation over these decades knows that the prisoners who are held by Israel are of central importance to the whole society, and their freedom is of importance to the whole society. And so what has happened is that Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the other Palestinians doing these negotiations have always tried to focus on the Palestinians serving the longest sentences or subjected to the longest sentences. For instance, Abdullah Barghouti, who has been in prison for more than 2 decades, was a commander of the Qassam brigades in the occupied West Bank. He was sentenced to 5,200 years in prison, 67 life sentences. You have Ahmed Sadat, who is the Secretary General of the PFLP, who is, again, secular leftist, who's serving multiple life sentences. And then you have other Hamas figures, other figures that are unaffiliated but serving long sentences. They have their own way of prioritizing prisoners based on the sentences, and they made sure to not just have it be Hamas wants to get its people out. So Marwan Barghouti has always been number one on their list. I don't believe at all. I know that this is part of some of the narrative is like that the reason Israel wants to keep Marwan Barghouti in prison is because he would be able to like crush Hamas in an election. I think in large part, they're keeping him there because of what he represents to the Palestinian people. That's, I think, is more important than anything else. It's not about, primarily about Hamas or Abbas or anything. It's that Marwan Barghouti was a hero and leader in the eyes of the Palestinians in both intifadas, and he was also involved with the armed struggle. Yes, he has spoken in a way about a two-state solution that also makes him an attractive political figure to the West, and I think that's also a threat to Israel. They don't want a Palestinian who is going to be able to have a dialogue with the West as they push for their self-determination. When it comes, though, to how Hamas views this, I don't think it's insincere when Hamas says that what they want to see happen is democratic elections. Yeah. And part of it is that strategically, Hamas is the single most popular political party right now. If Marwan Barghouti is not on the ballot, and I'm not sure that Marwan Barghouti, if he came out of prison, would say I'm in Fatah again. That remains the affiliation in prison because of the way that it's organized. But it would be very interesting to hear it. What we do know is that he recently was assaulted in his. Well, he's been assaulted repeatedly, physically, and tortured in prison. But Itamar Ben-Gvir, a couple months ago, goes into his cell when they started talking about there's going to be potentially another ceasefire, and telling him to his face that you will never get out of this prison. And Marwan Barghouti, who like many of the Palestinian prisoners, has learned and speaks Hebrew. Stood up against him. But we also understand from families of other prisoners who were there when Ben-Gvir stormed that cell, that they were defiant in his face. But the Israelis don't want to release that video, but that they stood their ground. Those are the reports coming from the families of the men who are in prison with Marwan Barghouti, that they all stood their ground. So I think that this that there is too much projection onto this angle that Israel views Marwan Barghouti as a threat to having Hamas, which they find convenient. I think that they view him.
I didn't mean that at all. I know it came across like I was implying that, but that's not what I was saying. I was just using that as
I'm not necessarily responding to you. I'm saying that I see this line and I don't actually agree with it because I've really studied the sadism of Israel toward Palestinian prisoners, and I understand, and a lot of Palestinians have taught me this, the importance of all of these political prisoners to the society. And if you read the manifesto that was released about October 7th, one of the main objectives of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood was the liberation of these prisoners. It's how Yahya Sinwar himself was liberated from an Israeli prison, was because of these kinds of exchange deals. So maybe, Hassan, we can unpack a little bit of what's at play here right now. On the one hand, what the Palestinians managed to do with Trump was to these two issues, the sort of epic big issues that will impact Palestinian self-determination, and then zero in on the issues of the war. They made massive concessions in this, and it's a huge gamble. And people, working on the negotiations have told me that essentially the crucial factor here was that they got direct assurances from the Arab and Islamic mediators, including Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. And it was the head of Turkish intelligence, the head of Egyptian intelligence, and the prime minister / foreign minister of Qatar all told the Palestinians that they have very firm guarantees from Trump that he's not going to allow Netanyahu to resume the genocide. Now, people say, oh my God, that they're so stupid. How can they take this deal? The alternative from their perspective was to fight, to continue the fight, which Israel has failed to militarily defeat the Palestinian resistance. These are guys wearing, sandals with homemade weapons, and Israel has failed after 2 years of mass murder, has failed to get them to wave the white flag, and they're not going to wave the white flag. So the alternative would have been continue that war, but this time with the Arab and Islamic countries who kind of got cucked by Trump when he rolled out his 20-point plan with Netanyahu, because they had showed them a different version of it. And then they come out and they make this announcement. And the Arab countries said that, there's differences here, this wasn't, but they did it very diplomatically. But from the Palestinian negotiators' perspective, now they say, oh, we're going to reject this deal. And the narrative is even the Arab and Islamic countries told them to take it, and they didn't. And I think that they felt like this was an opportunity to end the genocide, this acute mass murder campaign, start getting aid back in at levels that are consistent with the January 2025 ceasefire agreement. That's at least 600 trucks a day coming in, which is, basically the minimum that the United Nations food experts have said need to come into the Strip.
Which, by the way, is a direct admission of Israel's guilt, Israel's war crime, using starvation as a weapon of war, which I also thought was interesting. Not that I have any confidence in the international organs of justice, but that is a deliberate, open, transparent admission that they were utilizing flows of aid, humanitarian aid, going into this captive civilian population that they're bombing as a talking point in the back and forth in the ceasefire negotiations.
So what they're getting here is they're getting what shouldn't even be something to negotiate over. They're getting basic life essentials, but such is the nature of their enemy in this, that doesn't care about committing war crimes, doesn't believe in international justice, is empowered by the most powerful nation in the world. So you have the aid coming back in. You are going to get a significant number of Palestinian prisoners freed, including 250 who are serving life sentences. But the Israelis are really fighting. They do not want Ahmed Sadat, Abdullah Barghouti, Marwan Barghouti, any of the most well-known Palestinian political prisoners to be freed. And it doesn't look good right now, Hasan, to tell you the truth. I mean, what I'm hearing is that it's not looking good. I think there's still hope in Palestine among these families that it's going to happen, but they're desperate also because they view this as the last chance to get their loved ones out of prison, who are widely viewed in Palestinian society as freedom fighters who are being imprisoned because they participated in the armed struggle against an apartheid occupation regime that wants to wipe them off the map. That is their perspective on who these men are that are in prison right now. And it goes beyond Marwan Barghouti. I mean, there's, like I told you, there are guys there that are sentenced to many, many life sentences, and they're being tortured routinely and regularly in these prisons. So they're getting a bunch of Palestinian prisoners freed. Yes, they're giving up what is their primary, almost exclusive, but not exclusive leverage that they have. I say almost exclusive because the leverage that they do have remaining to them, as Mohammed al-Hindi mentioned to me, the chief political negotiator for Islamic Jihad, is the armed resistance, because they're not, the terms right now they're not disarming. They're not surrendering. They're not accepting exile. They have an agreement where the president of the United States is saying that there's going to be no more forced expulsion of Palestinians. He can't be trusted, of course, and they're aware of that, but that's where it is right now. They're reopening the Rafah border crossing, both directions. There are terms that were just published tonight. Al Jazeera Arabic, I'm not sure if you saw this because you were on the air, they obtained some of the specific terms of what was agreed to, and I'll read you a few of them. This is actually breaking news, and I think people watching this might find this interesting. But the agreement that Trump endorsed says the war will stop as soon as Hamas and Israel agree within 72 hours. Aid at the January 19th levels. Then it's stuff about the exchange of captives. But it says a mechanism will be established for exchanging information about the detainees between Hamas and Israel via mediators. An Egyptian delegation will be sent to the Offer checkpoint where prisoners are gathered to verify the names of those scheduled for release, the Palestinians. This is incredible what I'm about to read you right now. A joint operations room committee will be formed, including Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, the United States, Israel, and Hamas for follow-up. This is in terms of implementing the ceasefire. Hamas is going to send information on its captives. Israel is going to send information on the Palestinian captives. And then it says that Hamas and the Gaza Strip simultaneously will coordinate with the Red Cross to hand over the Israeli captives, and that all of them need to be handed over between Sunday and Monday at 6 a.m. local time, along with as many of the remains as possible. So what the Palestinians achieved from their perspective in this is that they didn't abandon their red lines, but what they gave up was something that they said they weren't going to, which was they weren't going to release all of the Israeli captives until they had a very clear timeline and a substantial progress toward a full Israeli withdrawal. You look at those maps, the Israelis are only pulling back a little bit from the sea. And then the second phase of their withdrawal, this is just a redeployment. The second phase of their withdrawal, though, Hasan, would be only once there's an international force in place and that there's a certification about demilitarization and disarmament. And then the third zone has this nebulous thing about a border zone, a buffer zone that's going to encircle the entirety of Gaza. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when I say that border crossing is going to be open with Egypt, that's the only gateway Palestinians ever have had to a world that Israel isn't in control of. Because it's their only gateway to Egypt. Everywhere else, you're in Israel's hands. Israel still will remain in control largely of that border crossing, but they have to agree to a mechanism where the EU and Egypt are involved with it. So they made a concession without which there wouldn't have been this deal. And they're taking an enormous risk, and they're putting a lot of currency on the fact that Arab and Islamic countries are sticking their necks out in a way and saying, we promise you Trump isn't going to let them do the genocide again. You can look at them and say, oh my God, they're foolish. Like anytime someone who doesn't have skin in the game, whose family members are not being murdered, whose son was not just killed and then they have to go sit in a room next to the Israelis in a negotiation, who says, oh, Hamas is making a mistake from the comfort of their computer somewhere. Like Palestinians overwhelmingly want the genocide to stop. They were demanding the resistance make a deal. And what I hear from all Palestinians involved with this at a negotiating level is we got what we felt was the best deal that stops the genocide, preserves our rights to self-determination, doesn't give up any of our fundamental rights. And yes, we had to make concessions, but we're doing so now with an unprecedented level of involvement from Arab and Islamic countries. If they resume their genocide again, it's on all of those people. It's on all of these Islamic countries that they failed to stop it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Obviously, I'm not one of those people. I have been very critical. There have been some people who are like, "Oh, just keep up the fight. How dare you?" And it's like, yeah, when you're sitting in the comfort of your home in the Western world, it's very easy for you to speak on the death and destruction that befalls the entirety of the Palestinian population. But the calculation here that I was trying to comprehend, and I wanted to ask you more about this because you have been able to interview a lot of these people, is this a calculation born out of both the internal political pressures of broader Palestinian society and recognizing that this defensive attrition is far too costly, or are there actual real assurances coming from the American side that they're confident? Or is that confidence simply coming from the idea that there are a lot more eyeballs on this, an unprecedented amount of attention from the Western world as well, from Western populations?
I think you put a pin on a bunch of things that are at play here. Certainly, there was just off the charts pressure on Hamas primarily to make a deal. And it wasn't just coming from, sort of random people in society or the kind of the population. And it also was coming from within their own families, within their own, larger, broader, extended families. And I get the sense when I talk to them that they toil over that fact and that they're trying, I think they felt that they had made every possible concession they could have in August 18th when they accepted that deal. And the response was then to try to murder the negotiators. So that definitely is a factor, that pressure. I also think that there is a recognition that the overwhelming majority of our world today recognizes Israel for what it is, sees its crimes in full view. Even though these European countries are just a pathetic discussion group on these issues, and they say all kinds of nonsense about, in order for there to be a two-state, the Palestinians have to be disarmed. I mean, it's have any of them studied fights against colonialism? Because they were the colonial powers, and of course they're thinking like that. The savages need to be disarmed so that we can invite them into our little community as lesser players. But it's still unprecedented. The number of countries that are recognizing Palestine as an independent state, the number of ordinary people, the number of artists and others around the world, the way that Israeli society is viewed. It's not just the way that Netanyahu is viewed, as much as some American politicians want to say, it's just Netanyahu, that people see it for what it is. And I think that these guys also recognize that we may have a horrifyingly powerful adversary in the United States on the other side of this in terms of trying to block the will of the world, but we've never had more support behind us. So I think those two things factored in with a lot of Palestinian analysts that you talk to from within the resistance, they believe that the last 2 years have severely weakened the Israeli state.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it was basic, our people are being annihilated. Yes, our fighters are saying that they can continue the fight, but you're fighting against a nuclear-backed mass murderer, like a serial killer masquerading as a nation state, backed by the United States. And now it's going to be a narrative of everyone in our neighborhood that are supposedly our friends or, we share a faith with is telling us to take this deal and we reject it. I think they felt that the cost risk, analysis just on a strategic level was such that they had to try for this option. And I think they didn't have any other choice. But it wasn't like this narrative of, Israel's invasion of Gaza City put so much pressure on them that they had to come to the table. That's always been false, and it's been false for 77 years that works as a tactic. You can kill Khalil al-Hayya, you can kill Yahya Sinwar. You're not killing Palestine. So, I don't think that was the factor. I think the factor was recognizing some strategic realities and trying to recognize what can we get now that if we reject this, we'll never have a chance to get again. But primarily, I think it was motivated by trying to end the genocide so that they could focus on these existential questions that Trump's trying to ram down the throats of everyone in Palestine right now.
Yeah, I think one of the immediate things that we could do as like people who are more knowledgeable about Palestinian existence and are committed to Palestinian advocacy is to drop the false notion that like Hamas is operating to save their own skin or something like that. I think this is just a completely faulty. It's a completely faulty smear campaign that Israel is engaged in and themselves have actually believed. And it's very obvious that Hamas itself has shown time and time again that their higher need has always been their higher priority. Their highest priority has always been developing Palestinian sovereignty and creating a nation state. Now, having said that, the assurances, it does seem to me, come from the public support. So it's important for us to obviously continue talking about this and continue protesting because obviously the job is not over until there is real emancipation, real sovereignty. Do you feel like there's any chance that Israel could operate in the exact same ways that they did in the January ceasefire that very quickly fell apart after Israel showed that it had no ambition to continue a ceasefire once they got some of the prisoners of war and some of the hostages extracted out of the Strip, and then continued its bombing campaign and actually greatly increased the intensity of the famine as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most likely scenarios is that Israel does find a way to resume its war against the Palestinians in Gaza. I think there are some impediments to that didn't exist in the January deal that we've talked about, some of them involving the Arab and Islamic countries. I also think that, Trump has kind of said the quiet part out loud. He views Gaza after the war as a huge profit area. He was going on and on when he announced his plan about the real estate value of Gaza. You don't bring in somebody like Tony Blair unless the point is to try to impose a neo-colonial profit machine on a place. The other dimension to this is who does Trump send to make the deal here? Two real estate guys, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and then Steve Witkoff. And, there's been these reports recently that Steve Witkoff's son has been trying to cash in on the fact that his dad is the one negotiating with all of these Gulf Arab states.
Fantastic.
But you also have Jared Kushner, whose firm Affinity Partners is bankrolled primarily by Gulf money. He's gotten billions of dollars from Saudi Arabia, and this is money from sovereign wealth funds. He's gotten from Saudi Arabia, from the United Arab Emirates, from Qatar. Trump, as a president, doesn't just make decisions based on what he thinks would be good for him as the president of the United States, and certainly not what he thinks would be in the best interests of the United States as a country or as the Americans as a people. He's often thinking of how can I make money for my friends and my family, and he's still basically running a mafia-like enterprise with his family businesses. So having Jared Kushner there in the room with his business partners, who also are the mediators. I mean, do people understand that this is so wild that this is the reality of what happened here? Jared Kushner walks into these meetings. He's not meeting with like the prime minister of Qatar as like, this is the mediator that's been working on the ceasefire for 2 years. They have a personal relationship that is a business relationship. Yeah. These people are giving Jared Kushner huge amounts of money. So there's a sick and twisted reality here that perhaps one guardrail that is not, rock solid, but it is a guardrail of sorts, is that there's so much interlinkage of the money between the Trump family orbit and some of the parties involved with this, that could also be something that causes Trump to sort of say to Netanyahu, I'm not letting you do this right now. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying we have to recognize facts.
The narcissistic desires or even the financial interest that Trump has might play a role in to some degree, maintaining a continued ceasefire here.
Because look at the position also that these Arab and Islamic countries are in. Not all of them, but most of them are facing a reality where their populations view them as having done nothing, or worse than nothing in some cases. You know, Jordan participated in the air defense of Israel when Iran was counter-striking Israel.
So did Saudi Arabia, and still continues to do so. Yeah.
So, but the populations in these countries overwhelmingly support the Palestinians. They want the genocide to be done, and they're furious that their rulers have not done much of anything to try to stop it, and in some cases have aided or abetted it by helping to protect the entity that's doing this.
UAE potentially allegedly working with the popular forces. There
was satellite imagery also published today that indicates that in this base that the UAE has been operating, in Somalia, that they're also using that to monitor in the Red Sea and potentially assist in the attacks against Yemen. I mean, the UAE, if you really dig down on its role here, and you talk to Palestinians who are involved with the resistance, the perspective is that the UAE is, as a governing authority, is basically a suburb of Tel Aviv politically when it comes to issues around, Palestine. So all of those countries, they want it to end. I'm sure some of them sincerely also are against it. I don't know any of those royals personally, but that's not what's relevant here. What's relevant is their populations are furious. If they participate in a process where they say they've guaranteed it, and then they're just part of a huge hoodwink operation where then Netanyahu next week, after they get their 48 people back or 20 living and some remains, that they just do a full-scale invasion again. I think that's unlikely that it's going to be that immediate kind of a thing. What I think is more likely is what Israel's pattern has been in Lebanon and what it's been toward the Palestinians before, but on a more exaggerated level. What do I mean? I mean that Israel is still going to occupy officially, under the agreement of this first phase, roughly 50% of Gaza. And they are saying openly that they're going to continue to strike Hamas. They are saying that Hamas has signed up to a deal for disarmament. Hamas did not make that agreement. They broke it into two. They only agreed to this part of it. But what we're going to see probably is constant Israeli strikes against, quote unquote, Hamas.
Yeah.
And how frequent those are going to be, how big they're going to be, we don't know at this point. But I think it seems pretty clear aid is going to come in. People are going to be allowed, quite a bit of freedom of travel compared to what they had a month ago. There was a huge exodus going from the south and center back to the north today. The Rafah is going to open. I think all these things will happen. And then you're going to have a kind of mowing the lawn, as Israel calls it, a kind of constant bombing somebody somewhere all the time. And in the background is going to be these negotiations that Trump wants over the rest of his plan. And those are bad news for the Palestinians. So I think the resistance groups were wise to say this has to involve all Palestinian factions, but where this is going to go next is Hamas needs to disarm. In 2 weeks or even in a week, that's going to be the whole focus. Once those captives are back, the entire thing is going to be, where are Hamas's weapons? They need to put them down. They need to do it right now. And then, Trump's going to start threatening them. Well, we have no choice. Israel's going to have to do this. Yes, they did this drone strike. Yes, they had to blow this up. We're going to be looking at that scenario, I think, is a very likely possibility.
Yeah, no, this is what my suspicion is as well. There's two things that I think Israel could potentially use to sully the ceasefire side of this deal, and that is, they couldn't extract all of the dead Israeli hostages. And then also that they're not going to commit to disarmament, or even if somehow Hamas or the resistance groups did commit to some kind of disarmament, they could just still continuously say that's not the case. So we have to do these targeted and more precise assassination strikes from afar.
You know what? One wild. I'm glad you brought that up, because so earlier this week I interviewed Musa Abu Marzouk, who is. He was an original member of Hamas. He was the first head of its political bureau. He remains a senior official. He was actually jailed in the United States. He was educated in America, lived for 15 years, has a PhD from the United States. He, not unlike you, in a sense, was snatched in an airport at one point. Although you have an American passport and you were released, he was then taken and held for 2 years because he was on the terror watch list. And then eventually he was released and deported to Jordan. And then when Bush, this was in the late 90s, and then when Bush and company came in and the Patriot Act and stuff, they indicted him in absentia on, conspiracy and terrorism charges. But he had already at that point was a senior Hamas official. But I spoke to him the other day, and he was deeply involved with this intra-Palestinian dialogue on this. And he said, Donald Trump said that 25,000 of our fighters were killed, of Qassam brigades. And the estimates from the U.S. intelligence agencies and other intelligence agencies prior to the war was that was roughly the size of the Qassam brigades.
Yeah.
And Trump himself said it, 25,000 of them had been killed. And he said, they largely destroyed the rocket infrastructure, or the rockets were used by the Palestinians. So what weapons are they even talking about here? We're talking about rifles. We're talking about small arms. And I think I would add to your list of things that we need to really push back against. I would argue, Hassan, that the issue of disarmament is not actually aimed at Hamas giving up a single gun. What it is a proxy for is demanding the surrender of the Palestinian people. Because the weapons that they have available, the most dangerous weapon that the Palestinians have is their will to live, is their steadfastness. You look at that, like John Elmer of Electronic Intifada he's like the moral equivalent of the generals on CNN. He does these analyses of the weapons of the resistance. If you watch John's segments where he's walking you through their weapon systems, a lot of what you're seeing is remarkably brave Palestinians going up very close to Israeli tanks and literally dropping a homemade bomb inside the tank.
Yeah.
Or they have complex ambushes, but they're using homemade gear and they're repurposing Israeli ordnance that they've seized from the
unexploded
rubble.
Munitions or recovered ordnance.
What are we talking about? When we're talking about their weapons, they talk like that as though Hamas has tanks or aircraft, or that they have some ultra advanced precision guided sonic missiles. What we're talking about here is they want a surrender. So I think people need to get this into their heads, that when they talk about why doesn't Hamas just disarm, that's a way of brainwashing you into believing that that's the actual threat here. The threat is that Palestinians live and they continue to live in Gaza. That's really what they're talking about when they talk about disarming them. Yeah. So, but this is going to become the entire obsession, where every Hamas person who gets interviewed is going to be harangued with the question, but are you going to lay down your arms? Are you going to disarm? No one asks that of the mass murderer who was indicted by the International Criminal Court, who has nuclear weapons, who by routine burns children alive in tents, who has killed tens of thousands of people whose only crime was being born Palestinian. No one talks about disarming that state. What's Germany's response today? Oh, there's a ceasefire. We should lift this limited arms embargo we have on Israel.
Ridiculous.
I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but this stuff drives me nuts because I monitor the discourse in the broader media, and it's remarkable how the same garbage gets repeated over and over to the point where even good people start to adopt bad narratives because it's been drilled so deeply into their head. We have to unfuck our heads with this propaganda, including people who think they support Palestine. Stop accepting their narrative.
Yeah. Especially because resistance against an occupation is completely legal under international law, and an occupation itself is actually illegal. Israel's occupation and apartheid is illegal under international law. So the way that
under international law, but it's also look, my family is from Ireland. My grandparents grew up in the era of the black and tans, where these mercenaries and militias were rampaging and murdering the Irish who dared to live with a spirit of being free Irish people. And among so many Irish, they look back and they say, we fought a legitimate war of liberation for our freedom against British colonialism. And of course, the British then always tried to characterize the Irish as terrorists. But many Irish people, if you ask them about it, they'll say that our relatives fought so there could be a free Ireland. The Palestinians deserve to have that same history written about themselves. And we have an opportunity in real time to say, wait a minute, these narratives are always a lie. And it's, there's the Palestine exception always to this, but also prophets aren't people who see the future. They're people that understand the present. If there ever was a moment that called for prophecy, it was now for us to actually open our eyes and say, is the truth true right now? Do these people have a right to fight against this kind of enemy? Gratuitous, colonialist, mass murdering, serial killer enemy whose entire agenda is to wipe them off the planet. Yes, they do.
No, absolutely. It's not only legal, but it's the moral thing to do, 100%. So, okay, we've talked a bunch about the ceasefire proposal. There are some unexamined aspects of it, or some aspects of it that we didn't dive too deep into. But I think Tony Blair's introduction to this process is really terrifying. I think like a viceroyship, as you described. Especially because while it looks like there is some friction between Israel's maximalist demands of complete ethnic cleansing, the Rafah program as they designed it, which was to create concentration camps at Rafah and then force every Palestinian into those concentration camps for expulsion from the Strip, potentially to other concentration camps elsewhere with pliant partners in the region, whether it be UAE or other places. I don't think there's a lot of daylight between what Tony Blair's ultimate role is here and what Israel could potentially do with Tony Blair, considering that he played a formative role in the Boston Consulting Group program, the Gaza Riviera project, when they were designing it with this insane cryptocurrency. We're going to make a Silicon Valley out of the Gaza Strip, and we're going to give people crypto tokens as opposed to their symbolic house keys that they have as we ship them off by force from the Strip, never to be able to return. And I do think that this deal, regardless of how Israel presents it as not abiding by their maximalist positions, is still going to be a continuation of the apartheid structure and potentially ethnic cleansing as the ultimate goal here. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think generally I do. Yeah, I do. I think that I think part of how Israel views this, particularly as long as Trump is president, there are certain things they have to go along with right now that maybe Netanyahu didn't want, or it didn't happen the way he did. But there's another level on which Trump is really saving Netanyahu. This war, quote unquote, was not going well. They weren't winning. They weren't recovering the rest of their captives. They were continuing to have soldiers dying. It wasn't massive numbers of soldiers that were dying, but relative to the size of Israel's population, they were consistently losing soldiers. They were having morale problems. They were having recruitment problems. There were military commanders who were constantly saying, that this isn't going to happen quickly. So there's a level on which I think there's some relief on the part of Netanyahu on this. I think that there was a lot of emphasis placed on, is his coalition going to fall apart? I think that was a sideshow in a lot of ways. Also, public opinion polling in Israel across the spectrum, there was wide support for the agenda in Gaza anyway, among all kind of political outlooks, with the exception of a very small section of the Israeli left. And when I say small, I mean microscopic compared to the polling of 80+% supporting various aspects of this agenda. But it lives for another day. Their reputation is in tatters. It's lower than it's ever been. Trump is facing his own mini insurrection within the MAGA base. People are starting to, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene going on TV today and saying this is a Holocaust and saying this isn't fake, and it's I don't have anything to say about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I thought she was just an epic clown in so many ways. But what she's saying right now, but she was important in Trump world. When people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are out there saying this, I'm not saying, oh my God, I'm now going to embrace Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm saying that if this is happening within his own base, and the discourse around Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk's assassination and all the questions that are being asked there, these are factors in Trump world. Trump is totally plugged into the culture in that way. He's obsessed with it. That, all of these things are coming together to mean that, there's a sense in which Trump is thinking domestically. Trump is kind of saving Netanyahu in a sense. And from Netanyahu's perspective, he gets all the Israeli captives back. They're gonna remain in Gaza. He can fight another day. The same way the Palestinians have to deal with the whole, deal with Trump's plan, so does Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu's confident that people's attention's going to wane, certain things aren't going to be implementable, and that his agenda is going to carry on. And, the West Bank is going to be in the sniper scope of this murderous regime. It already is in an unprecedented way. Largest displacement of the West Bank since 1967, cutting a line across it, dividing it south and north. Really heinous stuff is going on. So I would say that this is a pause that Netanyahu's people are taking in a kind of, for a number of reasons, but they're going to now kick into high gear and try to get everything they can out of this. Deploying an Arab force, that's what Trump is talking about. An international and Arab, international force is going to come in. Let's see. Well, they're going to be the ones that are going to go disarm the Qassam brigades. You're going to have Emirati troops going into tunnels to try to hunt down Qassam brigades. I mean, some of this stuff, it's like you wonder if they really thought it through.
Yeah,
but when but it's dangerous.
That's part of the reason why.
Because
well, that's part of the reason why I've thought that I've reflected on this iteration of the ceasefire in a similar way to the first one, where it's more so it's not about a real ceasefire, but instead it's about managing the PR of this genocide. As it maybe winds down a little bit, and it's not as continuous and as aggressive as the now 13 Hiroshima equivalent munitions that have been used in the entirety of the Gaza Strip, but more precise striking, like you also mentioned in Lebanon, like what Israel has continuously done in Lebanon post the potential so-called ceasefire that took place in Lebanon as well against Hezbollah. Having said all of that, I think one of the things that we should be pushing for as media figures in the Western world is probably to try to open up the floodgates of Western press to enter the Strip, to try to even begin to calculate the totality of the harm that has taken place, to make a better assessment and put the true human toll of Israel's genocide, Israel's relentless genocide in front of as many Western eyeballs as possible, which is something that I know Benjamin Netanyahu also fears, which is, I think, a separate ambition of his to never really abide by a full-blown ceasefire.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to say, like, I am really I'm deeply concerned about where this is going to go. I think, I'm so relieved to the point that, like, I really felt when I got a call 37 minutes before Trump announced this deal. We published a story saying that the Palestinians had accepted the deal, and the first person that told me this came out of one of those meetings, Palestinian, and left me a voice note, winded, just saying it's over. Like we've agreed to it, and that the emotion there is so complicated, but the biggest part of it is just thinking what has happened the past 2 years, what has happened to so many people. I think of I thought that night too of of all the images of children burned alive, or children who survived, but they're trembling and they're next to their younger sibling and they're having to comfort them in a hospital bed when they're filled with rubble and their parents have just been killed. And everyone watching this, I know your audience, they care deeply about this too. And I do see you guys in the chat, by the way. People were asking me if I saw, and I always feel at home coming to this community. But I know everybody has some image fossilized in their head from this genocide, anybody with a heart. And I think of Hossam Shabbat, who reported for us, a great young reporter who would have been a brilliant writer, and he was assassinated by Israel. So on the one hand, like I cry tears of relief for all of our brothers and sisters who lived through this, who survived it and lost so much. And on the other hand, we know Israel. We know exactly what they do. And that's frightening, and it's terrifying. And it's terrifying to think that the Palestinians had to take this risk to believe that maybe Trump is going to have his own constellation of interests that can keep this, at bay. And that's our reality. Tony Blair, when he and Bush and others who were the architects of the Iraq War, what they thought they were going to do in Iraq erase the society and build up this neoliberal dream. And they deployed all of it's why they put L. Paul Bremer in, who cut his teeth under Henry Kissinger. They put him in, a neocon investment guy, risk insurance guy. They put him in there and he becomes the viceroy of Iraq. And the Iraqi people rose up against the United States. Yeah. And Iraq didn't go in the direction. It looked like it may have looked at times like they were winning. Oh, they killed, they captured Saddam Hussein. Oh, they destroyed the Ba'ath Party. But a different form of resistance rose up in Iraq. And Iraq is very much up for grabs. We don't know the direction it's going to go in. But one thing's for sure is that their neoliberal dreamland didn't happen. And they didn't win that war. They actually left in disgrace from Iraq. So, the two things I know to be true indisputably is that the Palestinians are never going to surrender. They're never going to surrender their will, their right, and there's a steadfastness that all of us should be in awe of among the Palestinian people. And the other thing that's true is that this entity that is trying to crush them is not going to give up. It's not going to give up unless it's confronted. And it's a shame and a stain on society that the only real confrontation of this apartheid regime that is happening from the very people that are being genocided right now. That the world stands by and thinks strongly worded statements are enough. And in our country, Hasan, in the United States, if we don't alter our political system, if we don't confront this rot at the core of it that has to do with the influence of this colonialist regime, Israel, on our politics, then we're not doing our job to actually stand in any sort of defense against what's happening to the Palestinian people. Because if the United States wasn't enabling it, it would crumble.
Yeah, and obviously, what goes around comes around as well. I mean, this is also a self-defense initiative as well for the future of American democracy, in theory. So there is that aspect of it as well. This level of this level of control, this level of foreign control, obviously, I think is very frustrating for many Americans. Not that they take the initiative, or not that we even have the networks of pressure that maybe some other countries have, such as Italy, because I have been a little disappointed, to say the least, about a lack of movement from what remains of the labor movement in this country, while feeling emboldened by the general strikes that's taken place in Italy, and that started off with like an edge, a much smaller independent union that gave the confidence to much larger unions to also take action and to implement a general strike, no matter what the cost is. And I think it's important that we keep pushing to the best of our ability, rid ourselves of the networks of influence and lobbying that has basically entangled the entirety of American consciousness and American media and American politics in this very negative fashion. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with you, and I would also add about the journalism industry. I believe that the core principles of good journalism, that you have your facts straight, that you actually do due diligence. I mean, just to give you one example, we knew that this deal had been reached, but I only had one source on it, and I didn't publish that story. I was sitting there pulling my hair out because I was starting to see stuff online about it, but I had it cold and I knew my source was right. But I believe that you need to get a second source. So we waited. We sat for almost 90 minutes. And I was calling every single person I knew. The second we got a second source confirming that the Palestinians had agreed to it, we published that story on DropSite. But I'm giving that as one example because I think that this narrative that somehow journalists have to pretend as though sometimes the truth isn't true, that you have to act like, well, there's the Israeli way of viewing this, and then there's the other side. I don't buy that at all. And I don't think that most people, I think people are smart enough to understand that there is no such thing as objectivity in journalism. What matters is, are your facts straight? Are you being transparent about what you actually believe when you say something? Are you delineating between opinion and fact? And are you giving people information that they can use to make informed decisions? so many journalists, they understand clearly what's happening, and they're either working at companies where they'll get fired if they say it, or so they're quiet about it because they want to keep their jobs, or they've bought into this lie as a way of kind of inoculating themselves from having a conscience, where it's like, well, our job is just to say he said this and she said that. This is nonsense.
It's also bullshit. They don't.
It's whitewash.
They don't even. They place a higher value on Israeli sources consistently, refuse to either even acknowledge Palestinian sources, or when reflecting on Palestinian sources, they oftentimes associate that information in a negative way, where they'll slant it as like the Hamas-run health ministry, even though time and time again it has been proven that Israel is an unreliable narrator of the events that have unfolded, making the media actually look foolish and silly, making people actually lose even more confidence in the credibility of mainstream and legacy press in general at a time when they're the most needed, right? And as opposed to the Palestinian side that has been incredibly calculated and also incredibly truthful, and has even undercounted in an effort to be obviously with all the logistical hurdles as well, but in an effort to be as transparent and as truthful as possible in terms of like the totality of the human casualties. To back up to what you made a good point before that I forgot to kind of emphasize, but you were talking about journalists going in, to Gaza, and I think it's very important that as many reporters and journalists as possible be able to come into Gaza, but it should be done recognizing that you are walking on the land of a people that have just endured a genocide, whose loved ones' remains have not been recovered, and where a record number of our colleagues have been murdered in a hunting campaign against Palestinian journalists by Israel with the support of the United States and other countries. And many of the journalists and many of the news outlets that would deploy their journalists there were part of the narrative, the pyramid of lies that were built around to dehumanize Palestinians. Yeah.
And they also have the blood of our colleagues on their hands for refusing to embrace our Palestinian colleagues when Israel banned all other reporters from coming in. It's not just that the people that are silent when Anas al-Sharif is assassinated, the most important journalistic hero of our lifetime, when Hossam Shabbat is assassinated, when Hassan Islaya is assassinated, directly targeted in a tent. He knew that they were going to kill him. It's not just the people that are silent, don't know the names of the journalists, won't ever mention that our colleagues are being killed. It's also that these news organizations had an opportunity when Netanyahu locked the place down and said no other journalists in, to hire Palestinian journalists. One of the things I'm most proud of that we've done at DropSite is that we believe in hiring Palestinian reporters in Gaza to report on the genocide. And you know what? Some of the reporters that we've worked with, they didn't have much training in journalism. Some journalism school, others were accidental journalists. Some of them, like our great Abu Bakr Abed, started off being a sports journalist and then ended up having to cover his own genocide. But it's one of the most rewarding experiences of all of our lives, the small team of people that run DropSite, to be able to work with those Palestinian journalists. Abdul Qadir Sabah is someone whose name a lot of people may not know. He's one of the main reporters now for DropSite in Gaza. He remained in the north of Gaza for so long, and he's been producing incredible video footage. So many of the videographers were murdered by Israel, and he has continued to do it. People should look at his reports for DropSite. One of our reporters has 5 children. She was almost killed, and by accident one night happened to sleep in an area of the house the rubble that they were staying in because it was cold and they wanted to move their kids to another location, and it got bombed, and the wall that in the room where they normally slept collapsed, and they would have been killed. We hear those stories from our reporters. But the point I'm making is, you invest in them and you share with them, here's what I know from my life as a journalist. Here's some edit suggestions I can give you. We need to actually check this. Did this person say this exactly to you? Or is it something that, like, they were sort of generally saying it? Okay, if they said it exactly to you, here's how we're going to handle this. Make sure you get the last names of people. You know, do you have video of that? That's an extraordinary scene. The amount of work that's required to sort of say, we want to collaborate with you. You are the eyes and ears of the world, and what little we can share with you to translate this into a broader audience, that's our commitment. Like, that's what we're doing. We believe in them as journalists. Why didn't all of these news outlets say, we're going to find Palestinian journalists to work with? You know, it's because of this narrative. Oh, they're Hamas. Oh, they're biased. You know, John Simpson, the famous BBC correspondent, we need to have Western journalists go in there so we can have an independent view of what's happened. No, Palestinians are giving you an independent view. You just don't believe it.
Yeah. No, the reason why I mentioned the Western press and humanitarian organizations entering the Gaza Strip is because, unfortunately, as it stands, a big part of the inability for large swaths of the Western population coming to the full recognition of this the genocide stems from the fact that at its base, they do not value Palestinian lives as human beings. It sounds insane to say, but that is obviously the truth. And it's reflected in their coverage. It's reflected in the way that it's reflected in the way that even like people who consider themselves to be pro-Palestinian view these events, where there is an air of collateralization for all of the lives lost. They do not, even when Barack Obama yesterday was talking about like Israelis, families who are in mourning and Palestinian people in general, like there is this asymmetry to the violence and who is the overwhelming recipient of said violence as opposed to those who are perpetrating it. And that is the reason why I say like it's a way to broaden people's perspectives by in a way that's not dissimilar to like Doctors Without Borders, for example, get people from the West directly into these areas so that there's like broader coverage and broader access in general.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, I think that as many forensic experts as we can get into Gaza to start, first of all, the most urgent need is the food, medical supplies, reconstruction, rebuilding of things. But if we're talking about sort of these other tracks that you and I have kind of talked about a bit tonight, of course, it's important to have journalists go in, but also war crimes investigators need to be examining the extent of killing that happened of Palestinian people. This must be exposed. And I think we're, if it's done properly, that we're going to see a death count magnitudes greater than what we've been, than the official numbers, which went through a pretty rigorous validation process by the Palestinian health authorities, even as their own medical facilities were being systematically wiped out. I also want to say that as Israeli forces reposition right now, they're burning down and blowing up a lot of Palestinian houses and infrastructure on their way out or on their way to their pullback lines. And I'm sure you have other things you're going to move on and talk about tonight, today. But one of the last things I want to say is just that I think that this period now requires more vigilance than almost any point of the past 2 years, because the Palestinian liberation struggle is hitting a crossroad right now. And the momentum has never been more on the side of the Palestinian people and more against the colonial settler project. And so if anybody, all of us feel relief if the bombs stop, or even, if the bombs reduce, like, I mean, anything that gives people a chance to live right now, I'm in favor of it. But at the same time, the war of extermination is not over. Netanyahu they're taking a slightly unexpected course right now, but don't for 1 second think that it's over.
Yeah.
Now is not the time to sleep on this. It's the time to become more engaged.
And there must be continued pressure applied in this situation, because I think like symbolic gestures of conditional Palestinian statehood recognition from Western countries is a direct response to that pressure, because they are trying to release a pressure valve. They're trying to create a pressure valve so that they it gets ahead of all of the mass mobilization and discontent. And
Can I ask you a question?
yeah, of course.
I know it's a cliche. I always ask you questions about Turkey, but I'm quite interested in your take on this. So my understanding from Palestinian negotiators was that when the head of Turkish intelligence, became directly involved, that this was pretty unprecedented, and that it was the head of Turkish intelligence and the head of Egyptian intelligence that were really the main guys telling the Palestinians that they have to take this deal. That this is their best strategic moment, but also saying, and I think part of it was leveraging what is this complicated but closening relationship between Erdogan and Trump. They have their separate spheres of interest, but there is this alliance, and I think Erdogan recognizes an opportunity for his power structure to have this good relationship with Trump, and Trump credited him as being the defining factor in getting Hamas to agree to this. I don't think that's literally true, but there's a dimension of truth to it that is very real. So I'm wondering what you see as Turkey's position in this, and this move where they came out of the gates and just took a very central role in closing this deal.
I think Turkey is positioning itself as one of the most consequential geopolitical players in the region, alongside Israel. In terms of Western influence, in terms of Western imperialism, I think they gave, in the eyes of the American foreign policy apparatus, I think the actions in Syria, overthrowing Assad swiftly with the Free Syrian Army, alongside HTS, was seen as a major gift to the West. A major gift to Israel's ambitions as well. That much is clear, it seems, as Israel continued its incursion into further and further Syrian territory. And I think there are the two major players in the region right now that are incredibly valuable from an American foreign policy perspective is Turkey and Israel, and they're a little bit at odds with one another. But I think that's the role that Erdogan is playing very well, like a servant of the West, unconditionally, while simultaneously, of course, still playing all sides to the best of his ability, but ultimately still, as long as it's under the nuclear umbrella of the United States and NATO, will always follow through on whatever America's desires are. That's, I think, why it's more important that I guess the Turkish intelligence played a role in speaking directly to the Palestinian resistance leadership. There's also obviously people within that structure that have spent a good deal of time developing relationships, playing roles in the negotiations process, even in terms of like the hostage release agreements that have taken place in the past, including, I think, the release of Yahya Sinwar. They have more credibility in the eyes of the Palestinian population than like anyone on the Israeli side ever could. And I think there are still some competent actors within the State Department that recognize the role that Turkey could play. I mean, I'm very critical of Erdogan, and I openly criticize him with regular frequency, but I think like they do serve an important role from the American perspective here, because they, like I said, have more credibility in the eyes of the Muslim world. Dare I say, even more credibility than Gulf states do, as a matter of fact.
I mean, certainly Turkey is taken very seriously by this administration, and I think I agree with you. It seems very clear that Erdogan recognizes great opportunity in Syria, in Palestine. Also, Turkey for many years has been playing a very deep role in East Africa. Somalia. And the sphere of influence of Turkey has expanded dramatically under Erdogan, and it's going to be very interesting to watch. Not just the relationship with Turkey, but I know maybe you already talked about it, but this I saw that you were posting about it. the Qataris signing this deal to have, a training facility within a U.S. military base, which there's a handful of countries in the world that have these kinds of arrangements where, their personnel are deployed and inside of an American military base. But it's like Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, strangely Singapore, and now Qatar. And Qatar just had this rather unprecedented security agreement with the United States that reads very similar to the Article 5 clause in the NATO Charter, where the United States and Qatar signed this joint defense pact. In my mind, there's also a question of how much are these countries making arrangements with Trump versus the United States government? And like what's going to happen when Trump isn't president again? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this kind of coalition that Trump is building around his personal interests and sort of U.S. government interests. It's a really uncharted territory we're entering.
I don't know. I think there's a direct line from Barack Obama all the way to Trump 1 and then Joe Biden and Trump 2 when it comes to American foreign policy. Maybe I'm a little bit more I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit more skeptical, but I don't think that there would be a dramatic shift in foreign policy if Donald Trump were ever to leave office to begin with, because there's also that alternative as well.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I agree. I totally agree with you. Not in foreign policy. I'm more talking about the constellation of individual players, because Trump does his Trump of Arabia thing. He's marveling at the marble and all of their, they don't have to have elections and all that stuff. And, he's transactional. He develops all these relationships. I'm saying, I wonder how many deals these guys made and what's going to happen then when it's like Trump's not there. I mean, in terms of policy, of course, I agree with you.
Yeah,
but I'm saying we're in a weird situation where it's like gangsters.
I think the military-industrial complex and the leadership there that play a very important role in designing this stuff, I think they like Donald Trump a lot more than they let on. They don't like the instability and the chaos. They don't like the domestic affairs. They might hate his foreign trade policies, right? But I think when it comes to this kind of stuff, developing a closer relationship with Qatar, I think like the ultra Zionists will get very mad about that, and they'll act like this is a big deal, or that like there is a tremendous amount of like Qatar influence in American politics or whatever. But I still think at the end of the day, this will be regarded as a positive, like developing closer ties with Qatar, and also even utilizing Erdogan more. I think that will continue. Because I don't know where we go from here. I feel like the way I describe it is like the last time Israel was not in the driver's seat in terms of our Middle Eastern policy was, I guess, to a certain degree under the Obama administration with the JCPOA. And then after that, when Trump 1 happened, we just gave all control, and now Israel just completely drives the car, steers the car. So I don't know if we'll ever turn away from that in future leadership. But maybe you disagree with me on that. I don't know. But I do think that like Israel always played a major advisory role in our Middle Eastern affairs. But I think Trump 1 was Trump 1 actually took the advisory role away and directly made them run the Middle Eastern, run all of our Middle Eastern affairs.
No, I think that's generally accurate. I'm more making a point about the nature of Trump's business dealings that he's making with all these people behind the scenes. But in terms of the architecture of American policy and history, obviously, I mean, it's remarkable the influence that that Israel has over certainly U.S. politics, U.S. politicians, both political parties in this country, but also just the foreign policy agenda. I mean, I think that some of Trump's advisors have, going back to the discussion about, why Trump might be willing to push Israel on some things right now. I also feel like Trump realizes this is just an impediment to other things that he wants to get done. It's not just about like, oh, he wanted the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it's also just annoying him right now. That it's like, and he wants to be like, oh, I made the peace deal. He keeps talking about himself as though it's like he's Pharaoh or something. And it's like, that he's one of these epic figures of history. He's 3,000 years. No one's been able to solve this. I think that's true. But at the end of the day, the difference between Trump and Biden, or Trump and most U.S. presidents is most U.S. presidents have been committed Zionists. And there's an ideology and an ideological commitment. No one more than Joe Biden. Although kind of Biden was sort of like a Yeltsin figure in the White House because he was just barely alive and they were pretending he was. But, if you look at his 50
that was more so Brett McGurk, I think.
Yeah, and these are committed Zionists, Anthony Blinken and others. They're ideological. Trump is transactional, and I don't think particularly cares one way or the other really about these things. I don't think he's ideologically a Zionist. I think that he has essentially assigned this aspect of foreign policy completely to the Zionists in his inner circle. And I don't, I don't know, on one level, Trump could be much more dangerous because of that, because he's just willing to say it doesn't really matter. On another level, Biden should go down as the butcher of Gaza for this stuff. I mean, there were so many moments at which Biden could have stopped this, and his administration was built around that belief that you go all in for Israel, and there was an ideological commitment.
Yeah,
and so they both kind of end up in the same place because the Zionist interest is controlling it, but Trump is, I don't see Trump as ideological, whereas Biden was a militant ideologue for Israel.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why. I mean, I'm not going to put a lot of confidence in the leadership of any Gulf nation state, but that's part of the reason why I kept reiterating that this like $400 million fight Air Force One plane that they're gifting to Donald Trump directly is not necessarily a bad thing if it actually softens Trump's approach to at least like a more diverse group of individuals that are speaking directly to him and trying to maybe limit the trajectory that Israel is on. So I think it's not bad necessarily.
We'll see. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not hard to predict Israel's actions because the whole point of the project is to erase Palestinians and to take all of the land of Palestinians. The question is what is the battle going to look like in this next phase? But I mean, let's hope that this lasts. Let's hope that Palestinians are remain on their land and that actually are able to rebuild it with Palestinian self-determination at the center, because that's certainly not the official agenda right now. And it's why all of us, no matter what our role is in society, have to take some part of every part of our day and put it toward standing up for the self-determination of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. By the way, dropsitenews.com/Hasan for 20% off your Dropsite subscription. It's incredibly important that we continue funding great journalism that you guys are committed to. It's been an honor to have you on as always. My favorite guest for sure, by far. Don't tell that to Ryan.
I mean, I won't tell Ryan. But you're like your crew of people. I know I've gotten so many cool messages from like the people that are in your chat. And one thing I want to share with this community of people is like the last time I was on, we had such a spike in the number of people that paid for subscriptions to Dropsite that came directly from this community of people. And it was like my colleagues and the team of people that we work with were like blown away by it because it was like just all of a sudden this spike. And for people that don't know this, we don't have any paywall. Everything we do is not paywall protected, and we want it to be free for everybody. Particularly, we want the reporting from Palestine to be available to as many people as possible. But those people who have the few bucks to go toward subscription, and you do it voluntarily, you're making it possible for us to keep that commitment to have no paywall. So I really. I sometimes get heat for coming on this show, and I really don't care. Because
who's giving you heat? Name names.
No, I'm just saying I see people online, and it's like it's like, oh, this isn't serious. No, it is actually serious. And if you want to reach people, that aren't just in the weird, commercial for the easy chair on CNN audience, then you go to a place where people talk about a range of issues and are willing to, have takes that maybe aren't the best, or it turns out that I was wrong about this. And one thing I always appreciate about you in particular is if you took people down a road and you feel like you led them astray, you come back to the beginning of that road and you say, I went down the wrong road. That's more integrity than most most media outlets have. And actually, having had direct interaction with people that watch this stream, you have some of the most sincere, caring people that I've encountered in that toxic sphere that is social media. So I'll always come back here, man.
Of course. And it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
All right. Appreciate you, Hasan. Appreciate everybody else too. Take care.
All right. Bye. That was Jeremy Scahill, a titan in the field of reporting and journalism. He's amazing. I am truly very fortunate to be able to have him on as a guest with regular frequency. You guys don't understand, this is a person who straight up broke the news before Donald Trump did that the Palestinians had actually signed off on the ceasefire agreement. That's crazy. One of the very few reporters out there that directly goes and speaks to the Palestinian side, the Palestinian resistance side. Why can't you like us like he likes us? Of course, I don't just like you guys. I love this community. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing one of the only Western reporters out there that does that.